What's the risk of trying to do this on your own?
It takes a lot of time and obviously that creative process. So sometimes you might hit a wall and you're like, what do I do in this room? Like, what color scheme should I use?
I love that idea because Sarah was so nervous about like the aesthetic of the game room not matching the aesthetic of the house. And I was like, obviously I'm not a designer, guys.
That's flattering that you inspired their design. And I think
Well, you inspired their design.
We are the Real Estate Robinsons.
Rihanna Michelle, super excited to have you. We've had the good fortune of being able to work with you for a while now. You've done a lot of the properties in our portfolio. You've done tons of amazing properties for other folks. So appreciate you coming onto the channel today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I want to get right in, right? Because design is one of the most important things when it comes to being successful as an Airbnb host.
Yep.
And I think a lot of people don't understand how critical design is when it comes to being successful, because even if you choose the world's most profitable city, even if you analyze the hell out of a deal and you're like, man, these numbers are rock solid, even if you do a great job at managing it, if you can't give guests a good experience from the design perspective, like that property never reaches its full potential. So what are some big mistakes that you see from newer Airbnb investors when it comes to design for Airbnb?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think just doing the research, really understanding the market that you've invested in and trying to figure out who is that ideal guest that you're trying to attract with your property. Is there a market out there for a specific themed Airbnb that speaks and resonates with them? And if so, what are those other properties doing? You need to validate with the numbers that there's an opportunity there for you and to do more and better than your competition. So doing that competitive research, doing that research on your ideal guest, having an adequate budget. So I think design and furnishings and that budget can sometimes be an afterthought, but I always encourage on that deal analysis calculator, which I know it's on yours.
I was just about to say that, yeah.
It has to be a line item, and overinflate that number. Things can happen, unexpected occurrences, things that you find at the property that need to be repaired. And so you want to make sure that CapEx budget, that furnishing budget, that designer budget is really, really strong so that it can contribute to you knowing, is this a good deal for you or not? And so I think design shouldn't be an afterthought. It should be backed by market research and having a really strong plan in place to figure out ways to be a scroll stopper, to be competitively stronger than your competition and more marketable. And then also not forgetting about that guest experience part of it, like really making sure that you're putting together an amazing experience.
The right experience, right? And you said so many things that I want to circle back on, right? Like if you guys have ever heard me say, you got to stop the scroll. I picked it up from Bree.
Yeah.
Right? That's something she taught me. But I want to touch on the budgeting piece. But before we do, you mentioned just kind of understanding your guest and kind of what the guest profile or the typical guest avatar in that market is looking for.
Yep.
So like we have properties in, right now we're in 4 different states, active in 3, right? We've got a property we're working on with you in Utah.
Right.
Our first commercial property. We've got a bunch of listings out in Joshua Tree. We've got some in the Smoky Mountains. We've got a few in Dallas. And each one of those, it is a slightly different travel. Like the person going to Joshua Tree National Park is a very different person than the person going into downtown Dallas.
Right.
So from a design perspective, like how does someone understand what people actually want in that market?
Yeah. I mean, looking at the visitor data about who's visiting these areas, the markets that you're looking at investing in, and then looking at your comparables, like what are other properties doing?
Yeah.
Did they lean in on a theme? Did they really niche their design to be specific to a certain demographic? And how are they doing? Is that paying off for them? And we don't want to copy the competition, but we want to make sure that we're like one step ahead and making sure that we're doing what they're doing, and more. And so if there's an opportunity and we can see that in the numbers, if you run some AirDNA data in the market that you're looking at, that's all you need. The proof is in the pudding. Like the numbers are there.
And I'm 100% the guy that likes to let the data make my decisions for me and not get super emotional. But sometimes there is you get into a situation where maybe there's not a whole heck of a lot of data to kind of support that decision. Like for example, we had a property out in JT, and when we first launched it, we had some issues with reviews.
Right.
Like I think our third review came in like a 1 star.
Okay.
And granted, we deserved it. There was an issue with the hot tub, and there was
Yeah.
some broken stuff that happened, so totally our fault. But the listing just like tanked after that. Like we couldn't recover because 3 reviews, one of them's a 1 star. You got like a 3-star rating on your first 3 reviews, right?
Yeah.
So we ended up reinvesting a bunch of money into the game room, and I think we spent like $12,000. But what we saw was that in that market, there wasn't a lot of this like super family friendly game room experience.
Right.
But we saw it in other markets that were super successful. Like we actually stayed at a property in Orlando in Disney, and it had this really cool Mario themed game room.
Yeah.
And me and Sarah looked at each other like, well, the listing's already shot. Like we can't make it any worse. And it ended up working out. So I guess to ask the actual question here, how do you decide on whether or not something maybe is too bold for a given market? Because I can probably do the Mario themed game room in Joshua Tree, but will it work in downtown Dallas? Maybe
Right.
not. So how do you kind of gauge the level of boldness someone should have when they're doing design?
I think with short-term rentals, you can get away with a lot, and you can go as bold as you like, but it has to make sense in the market. It has to make sense with that destination and the people visiting that market. So if you're in a rural area and there's not much going on and families are visiting, a bachelorette house is just not going to make sense. So
Right.
I'm just going to steer you away from that idea. But if there's a missing element that you've seen in another market and it's working well out there, and you're like, well, there's still families that come out here. We can see that in the visitor data. There's people that come out here with their kids. We're parents ourselves, and we know we need those amenities when we go visit places. Then it's definitely something to try. Maybe you don't need to fully theme out the entire house, and maybe you can focus on a specific room, like the game room. And that could be your risky move. It's like, this is where we go bold in this specific room, and this is what makes that room unique. But maybe we're a little bit more neutral throughout
the rest
the
of the house.
property.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can go bold in select areas.
I love that idea because Sarah was so nervous about like the aesthetic of the game room not matching the aesthetic of the house. And I was like,
Yeah.
obviously I'm not a designer, guys. Like the only thing I pick out is the TVs when it comes to our Airbnbs.
Yeah.
But like you said, I felt like it's a separate space. I think it'll work well. So going back to the numbers piece, because I think that's incredibly important. And this is me talking to everyone that's watching this video right now. I just want to reiterate what Bree said. When you are buying your Airbnb, you're not just focused on the down payment.
Right.
Because this is not a traditional long-term rental where someone else is going to come and put their stuff inside. It's your responsibility as the owner, as the host, to fill that property with furnishing.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that when you're analyzing deals, you're not just looking at down payment and closing costs, but you're also accounting for the startup, the design, the amenities. And if you use our calculator, realestaterobinsons.com/calculator, we have a line item in there for that.
Yeah.
So Bree, just for like ballpark, because I know this question is going to come up in the comments. What should I be budgeting? If I've got a 400 square foot studio in Joshua Tree, or I've got a 5-bedroom, 3,000 square foot cabin in the Smoky Mountains,
Yeah.
how do we even begin to understand what I should be setting aside?
There's a lot of rules of thumbs out there, right? And you'll hear different different ways to analyze this. But what we like to use is a $12 to $15 per square foot kind of rule of thumb. And it just, you can be somewhere in the middle of that, on the lower end, on the higher end. There's ways to be creative on how to make that budget stretch out further, partners that we could leverage that can pass down discounts. And so with all of that said, I think that's a sufficient budget to make sure that you're putting forth a really strong design plan that has scroll-stopping moments. It's memorable, it's durable, we're not sacrificing on quality. So I think that's our rule of thumb that we like to use. And some people, you might hear $5,000 a room or something like that. But what I don't like to be like pigeonholed into like a specific budget per room. I want to finesse that budget and make it work and prioritize like the rooms that are going to be your hero image, the first five images on that carousel. We want to make sure those are big moments, and we're going to spend more money in those rooms than maybe a bathroom, for instance.
Because there's more than just the bedrooms. You got to furnish, right? Like there's the living room, there's the outdoor space, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot that goes into it. So $12 to $15 per square foot is a good rule of thumb.
Yep.
So there's probably a lot of people watching this right now too, Bree, who are maybe like me, where we're good at the numbers. I can analyze any deal. I'm good at choosing markets, systems, and processes. I can knock those out. But I cannot design to save my life, right? What's the risk of trying to do this on your own? I guess there's pros and cons. Like, what do you see as the pros and cons of someone like me, no design experience, no skill set, trying to design that Airbnb by myself?
I mean, it takes a lot of time and obviously that creative process. So sometimes you might hit a wall and you're like, what do I do in this room? Like, what color scheme should I use? And I think with that, we kind of can take that and alleviate that off of your plate. But time is money. So our process is very quick moving. We're sourcing real time in stock readily available pieces. And so we want to make sure you get up and running, launched as soon as possible. We don't want you sitting on that mortgage longer than you have to. And so once you're in escrow and, you know, things are looking good, that's a great time to pull us in. But that would be my recommendation is just, you know, leaning on an expert so that it can give you your time back and get you up and running as soon as possible so that you could see that return on your investment, you know, as soon as you can. So.
It's like, I remember the first time that we worked with you, it was for our first tiny home.
Yeah.
And, you know, me, Sarah, and Omid, our partner, we were all like struggling on how do we make this space like useful because it felt so small.
Right.
And I remember you walked in, you're like,
okay, cool, yeah, we'll put the bed right here, we'll put a trundle bed right here, we'll put a bed, and just
in like 10 minutes, you had the whole thing mapped out. And we had been there for like, I don't know, however long trying to figure this whole thing out. And then we walked to one of our other properties and same thing. You're like, oh yeah. And words I didn't even, know, like, oh yeah, we need a sconce light here and you guys need a jute rug here and you need this there. So not only do you get, I think, the insights like when you hit that brick wall, but there's just a lot of things that you don't know about if you don't live, eat, and sleep and breathe design that you should be putting into a property.
Right.
Because if it were up to me, we'd have no sconce lights anywhere and the rooms would just be like dark, right? You know? So I think there's a lot that goes into it. So obviously for those of you that are watching, if you want to DIY it, there are some tips and, Bree will share some of those here in a bit, but there's also some risks associated with that as well, is that you probably just aren't going to do as good of a job. Now, Bree, I know you pulled some data, right?
Yeah.
On like well-designed properties that you've worked on versus comparable properties in the market that maybe they did try and DIY it themselves. Maybe they did try and, self-start. What have you seen as kind of some of the differences there?
Well, I mean, typically our clients are seeing a 30 to 50% increase in revenue potential. So that's a pretty strong stat right there as far as the revenue potential is increasing 30 to 50% when you invest in design.
Yeah, so just for like round numbers sake, if someone's got a property that does $100,000 in annual revenue, working with a professional designer like Bree is going to get you 130 to 150.
Right.
And I believe that, right? Because it's like when you're looking through Airbnb, there's a lot of options, right? It's like social media. You're just kind of scrolling and you always talk about stopping the scroll.
Yep.
And it's like that design, that photo is what really captures people's attention to make them stop, click on your listing, and hopefully potentially book.
Right.
Else being equal, if you've got a brand new construction 5-bedroom with a pool that's mediocre design, same exact property but with better design, people will pay more for this property.
Exactly.
So I think that's something that a lot of folks tend to forget, is that even though there's an investment, you got to make sure that you're buying nice stuff that pays off on the back end, because you're going to see that year after year after year in increased revenue.
Right. And yeah, I mean, like you just mentioned, there's justification there to charge more at that nightly rate. And so we also see with our clients in the markets that we've designed in, their ADR is 2 to 3 times higher than their comparables. And so maybe you don't want to be fully occupied 100% of the time. I have some thoughts on that too. It's like the wear and tear of your property. But what you rather have is a higher ADR that is going to achieve that, 30 to 50% increase in revenue potential with the right guest.
Right.
You want that ideal guest staying at your property. And so I think the proof is in the numbers, and that's what really is so amazing. I think about when you're thinking through the investment of design, it's going to pay for itself and more. It's an investment. And so it's not something that you should feel, unsure about. It's almost like a critical piece, and very much like table stakes right now. It's very competitive in the Airbnb market, and some of the markets that are a little bit more saturated than others. Design is that critical piece to set yourself apart. You never want to be competing just based off of price or amenity, because of course your neighbor over there has the hot tub, the pool, and maybe the same exact specs and occupancy. What's your property going to offer that's a little bit different? It's that experience and that design piece.
Yeah, someone told me that we're entering into the Airbnb amenities arms race, where it's like, oh, you got a hot tub, I'll get a hot tub, or you got this, I'll get this, or you got a game room, I'll get a game room, and it just kind of starts to spiral a little bit, right? So you do have to start identifying new ways to differentiate yourself from the competition. And honestly, that's what I love about a lot of the work we've done together on Joshua Tree is that a lot of our designs have kind of popped in different ways that market has. And like our Mars house, probably one of my most, I think it's by far my favorite property that we have in our portfolio from a design perspective. Because it's sleek, it's modern. Like there's so many little touches in there that you don't see in a usual Joshua Tree property.
Right.
And it's like that's what you get when you can really nail the design.
Exactly.
So I definitely want to get into just practical tips. So you do want to DIY, Bree will share some tips here. But first, Bree, obviously you run a design company that focuses specifically on Airbnbs, an Airbnb host yourself.
Right.
If someone wants to work with you, what does that process look like? What exactly are you giving to them as part of those design services?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the first and foremost, you reach out when you're looking for a property, you're in escrow. Those contingencies have already kind of passed and it's looking pretty promising. It's a great time to pull us in because we could be working on your design as you're in escrow. So by the time you get access to that property, you are in execution mode. The things are being ordered and delivered to the property, you're installing, and you're getting up and running maybe as within that first 30 days. So that's all the better. So reach out as soon as possible. That first initial engagement, you're going to have that free consultation, and that's going to be with myself. I think I always hear people are surprised, like, oh, I'm actually talking to you. And you're going to be actually working and consulting on this project. I'm like, absolutely. Like we build that like direct relationship with each of our clients, and we want to support them at every stage of their real estate journey and in this process, especially if it's their first one. We all know that very first one, you're like, whoa, this takes a lot of time.
So much time.
So much sweat equity, sometimes tears. Like it can be very emotionally taxing. And so if we can alleviate a little bit off of their plate to be like, hey, we'll take care of the design. We'll get this to be the most scroll-stopping property in the market. And you can focus on other parts of your business, getting your property management processes in place. And that, I think, is the critical piece. So that first consultation, we talk through your property, talk through your goals. What are you looking to achieve? And then we will kind of look into the market that we've identified. So if you're looking at Joshua Tree, if you're looking at the Smokies, we're going to do market research to say, okay, this is what we think is going to perform well in the market. This is what your comparables are doing. We need to do that and more. And this is the design aesthetic that we recommend, the color palette that we recommend. And I deliver that first with that like an initial mood board, just to get in some alignment there to make sure, are we on the same page? Do you like this direction that we're going in? And if so, that's what we're gonna go forward with. And we'll source every bit of that property. I don't want you to run Home Goods or Target in the market while you're installing. I want to make sure that we thought of everything for you, from accent walls to all of those Instagrammable moments throughout your property, down to the detail of like, what are you going to put on that coffee bar, and what amenities are you going to include there, or what are you going to style the coffee table with or the nightstand with. We want to make sure that we've thought about every item. So you're going to get a full source list with us, a full design plan that's very comprehensive, a very comprehensive install guide so that you're fully armed with everything that you're going to need in order to install this property.
Like, look at everything that you just listed out that comes with what, like, that's what you got to do if you're doing this by yourself. It's like everything she just talked about, which is why I never have any desire to do it. And even Sarah, who has designed some of our properties, we still use you very heavily because she just doesn't want to do all that work the majority of the time because it is so much that goes into it, And I want my skill set as the investor to be the investing, right?
Right.
The sourcing of the deals, the deal analysis, the day-to-day management piece.
Right.
And I feel like it's a better use of my time to outsource the design component to someone that's an expert in that field.
Right.
Because you're going to do it better than me. You're going to do it faster than me. And then I can go and focus on the things that are really going to move my business forward that only I can focus on, right? So I think there's a lot of value in that, Bree. What are some, when you maybe first start working with a new client, I'm sure you've probably had some clients that are easy to work with than others. What have you seen as maybe some of the potential obstacles that you identify working with someone new? That way, folks who want to reach out, they got an idea of how to make sure that relationship is most useful. Yeah,
I mean, I think, like I mentioned before, that adequate budget is really key, and making sure that there's a lot of pre-planning there of like what can we achieve with the budget that you have, and being realistic with what those goals are. And then the research component, making sure that they've done the research or they're willing to put in the work to educate themselves in this space. So your own entrepreneurship business you're building. A short-term rental business is not passive. You're constantly working at it. And so I think for a new investor, just having that piece of education and that they have a trusted resource from a design perspective with them every step of the way, I think is really key.
So Brie, one of the things I really appreciate about you as a designer is that you're not just talking from, third party perspective, but like
Right.
you're an actual host yourself.
Yeah.
How do you think that kind of plays into your ability to really service other short-term rental hosts as a designer?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's critical. I think it's critical to rely on an expert who is an investor themselves and they understand the pain points and the challenges that come with being a host. First and foremost, I think it helps the fact that we want to make sure that the bottom line, this is going to work out for you. As far as I want to set you up for success, and I want to make sure that this is a good investment and that we are putting forth a strong design plan that's profitable. And I think the way that we have positioned our, designs and our rates are very investor friendly, and we understand that that has to work out for you. So thinking about that is really, really key. And we also understand too, like the hospitality part of it. Not only do things need to look beautiful and scroll stopping and memorable, but there's a durability.
Right?
Yeah, the durability piece has to be there. And so we know the short-term rental usage, there's a lot of wear and tear. Guests are not kind to the furniture pieces that you put into a property. So we're thinking through all of those elements for you. We're hyper-focused on the details. We're thinking through, okay, what are the anticipated needs of that guest when we're walking through the property? We want to make sure we're one step ahead of them. Did they need that locally ground coffee from the coffee shop down the street? That's a really nice touch. We want to think of those things for our clients. And then also the fact that we have this kind of marketing branding background as well. My background is in marketing. And so I'm also thinking about ways can we elevate the property name, the brand of the property to make sure that they know where they're staying, that there is a branding moment integrated into the design consistently. And so that you can build that brand of your property, create that direct booking flow as well for you too, so that you can have more control over your short-term rental business.
I think you guys did a great job with your short-term rental, the Cozy Gramble.
Yeah.
I like that one. So you guys look it up, Cozy Gramble. You guys can go find it. And I think it speaks to a lot of the things you mentioned on this conversation about like, there's just like a whole vibe to the listen that you guys have. And I love that. So Brie, if someone, they've heard everything, they're committed to the design, and maybe they just want to say, hey, I want to try this design thing out on my own first, maybe bang my head against the wall a couple of times. What steps, like if someone's starting from a blank slate, right? They're under contract on this property, completely empty. What are some of those big milestones they need to hit to actually get to a designed, finished product? And I'm smiling right now, guys, because I already know that there's so much that goes into this, but try and give us just like the big milestones people need to hit.
The big milestones is setting that budget. Obviously, understanding your space. I think the functional space planning part is something that's obviously, it's technical, right? So we want to make sure that there's enough walk space between the furniture, that there's enough comfort for your guests. I don't believe more heads and beds equal higher ADRs. And so we want to make sure that we have the max occupancy in the property, but that it's a comfortable stay. That is there a seat for everyone at the table? And so thinking through those logistics at first, I think is really important. And then doing that market research, validating who are we going after as far as the guest avatar, identifying who that is, identifying the theme or vibe or color scheme that we're going for. And really putting that plan in place and then putting that pen to paper. Then you have to go and source everything.
Yeah. So the sourcing piece.
Right.
To me, this is where I feel like I would hate the most for myself personally, because like I wouldn't even know where to start. I wouldn't even know where to go. So like when it comes to sourcing, complete newbie, what advice would you have for someone there?
I mean, it's a balancing act. You're really trying to balance that budget, that durability piece, and then the aesthetics piece. So it's. I feel like you're a little bit of a wizard. You're trying to scour the internet to be like, okay, what is out there right now? What do I know is going to perform well in a short-term rental, but what's going to really pop off that screen and make people stop them in their tracks when they're looking for a place to stay? So I think relying on an expert to do that for you, because you could spend hours looking for an accent chair, and you don't want to get tied up in that time just looking for one piece of furniture when you have a 3,000 square foot property to source. It's very taxing. And so we know exactly who our kind of tried and true brands are that we know are good resources and places to shop from. And then, we can figure that out for you. So balancing that budget, balancing the durability piece is important.
Guys, so there's just think about all the different places you can go for furniture. Bree said, you could spend so much time just trying to find the right headboard, the right whatever it may be. But there is that process to go through. I know what Sarah's done for some of the flips that we've done that maybe didn't need as much design is we do try and look at the comps a little bit in that market to kind of see, okay, what's working, but that's also a fine line, because from an Airbnb, when you're furnishing, you don't want to copy the other person's furniture, because now what is the difference between you and that other listing? And it was so funny, Bree. We one of our tiny homes, a lot of people know us for our tiny homes in Joshua Tree now, and there was an identical tiny home next door. We didn't buy both of them, we just bought one of them. Yeah. And we were setting up our tiny home, and we just happened, the neighbor next door who bought the other tiny home just happened to be there setting his up as well. So, we're just making conversation, and he happened to be a fan of the podcast, and we walk over there, we're just talking to him, and we're like, hey, can we take a look? See how it's set up. And we walk in, and we're like,
hey, that's funny. We have the same media center at one of our properties. Man, we got that headboard and we just started looking around, and we're like,
this is literally all of the same furniture that we have. And we went into the backyard. He had the same 4-post pergola. And so, obviously, what's the saying, imitation is flattery, whatever it may be. But it's also it's cannibalizing your own listing, because now the only thing you're competing on is price if everything else is the same.
Exactly. Yeah, so, that's flattering that you inspired their design, and I think
you inspired their design.
But I think that's great. But then again, they may not be able to perform as well because there's really no differentiator factors.
Yeah, so fine line there on the sourcing piece. All right, so you got the functional piece, the budgeting, the sourcing. What comes after the sourcing?
And then it's then re-floor planning everything that you source, double checking, is this all going to fit and work in the property? Looking at that budget, are we within budget? Are we doing all the things? Did we hit the occupancy that the client is looking to achieve? If they want to achieve 10 occupants at that property, are we doing that well? Have we thought through the branding elements? Have we thought through an Instagrammable moment throughout the property? Have we done all of those things? We have kind of a checklist to make sure that we are putting forth the best design plan out there that is really going to help achieve that marketability aspect. And then once we put that into the floor plan, it's really about installation, right? So how are we going to pass off all of the knowledge we know from installing our own properties and doing installs ourselves and working with contractors? Then how do we pass that knowledge over? So putting together a very comprehensive guide of how do you hang curtains? How do you make a bed? How do you fluff a pillow? Down to those details, because we want to make sure that the vision is executed exactly how we kind of envisioned it to. So an installation guide, a floor plan, and then just being available to our clients. If something comes up and they have a question, they have direct access to me so that they can ask me any of those questions. And I want to support them at any point of their journey as they're installing. Or maybe 6 months down the road, they're like, oh, our neighbor down the street, they did a putting green and we don't have one. And we want to do something like that and more. So I'm like, let's do pickleball. Yeah. Let's have a tetherball court. What can we do?
Tetherball, that's a good one.
Yeah, what can we do to be different in the market? And so I think that's important too, is knowing that you're going to have to continue to enhance your property as the competition changes.
You couldn't be more true, Bree. And I've shared this, I think, in another video, but there's this resort that Sarah and I go down to a couple times a year in Mexico. It's called Escadet Resort. Yeah. And one of the nicest all-inclusives that I've been to. But one of our recent trips there, Sarah and I just kind of noticed that it's every time we were walking the grounds, they were fixing or improving something. Right. They were repainting a handrail. They were replanting some plants. They were just something, just consistently. And it served as a really good reminder to me and Sarah, who are obviously in the hospitality space as well, that it's you can't just set it up once and then like never go check on it.
No.
In the long-term rental space, you might get a tenant. You know, I have some friends that are landlords. They've had they inherited that tenant who had been there for 20 years.
Yeah.
They've owned the property for, like, that tenant's not going anywhere.
Right.
So you never have to do anything to that property once you own it unless, like, you know, something major happens. But with short-term, you do have to make sure that you're focused on not only that original setup, but over time continuing to elevate that experience as well. Just really quickly, one of the things you mentioned a couple times, I just want to define for the people that are watching here, but you said Instagrammable moment.
Right.
What is that? Like, what do you mean when you say that?
Can mean a lot of different things.
Yeah.
I mean, we love an accent wall moment where we can do wallpaper, paint, woodwork, a neon sign overlaid on top of it with either your property name or a tagline that like resonates with the market that you've invested in, or with the theme of the property. And having moments for your guests to be like, this is the place where we're gonna take our content and our photos before we go out.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a bachelorette house, you want those areas where the girls all wanna go take a picture and post that. And that's just like free marketing for your property as well. You want them to tag you in that post. And I think direct booking is just more and more important as the competition shifts and the market shifts. And so you want to be able to build that brand equity. So I'm always thinking about those moments and having an Instagrammable moment, a picture moment throughout the property, a fun moment that is gonna stop them in their tracks as they're looking for somewhere to stay. And then while they're staying there, create this experience that they're like, this is a 5-star stay. Just thinking out of the box a little bit with that. So Instagrammable, just a place for people to feel inclined to go take some content and fun photos.
Absolutely love that. Colby, so if folks want to get in touch with you, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, so BriannaMichelleInteriors.com. Follow us on Instagram. Send us a DM. Submit an inquiry form, and we can get back to you as soon as possible. We offer a free 30-minute consultation, and that isn't just for us to go over services, but it's really for me to get to know you and to understand what your goals are and how we can better support you. So that's the best way to get in touch with us.
And guys, we'll drop a link to Bree's contact info in the description of this video, so make sure you check below to check that out. Bree, very much appreciate you hopping on the channel today. Again, always enjoy the work that we do. And guys, we'll throw some photos up here as well so you guys can see some of the amazing work that Bree's done, obviously in her business, but for our portfolio as well. And we're actually working on a 13-unit motel together right now, which I'm super, super stoked about. And Sarah just took a trip back from visiting that hotel yesterday, and it's coming in together phenomenally well. So not only do you do the smaller stuff, but you focus on some of those big things as well. So excited to see what comes next, Bree. But thank you again for coming to the channel today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.